Welcome to Psyche Magic, a podcast about self-discovery and the subconscious, where we explore the symbolic language of dreams, tarot, and archetypes. I'm your host, Jordan Hale. I'm a psychotherapist based in Nashville, Tennessee. Each episode, I'll hold a casual conversation with various artists and healers about their shadow work practices. We pull tarot cards, unpack a significant dream or dream theme, and discuss their personal healing arts practices. So please grab a cup of something delicious and stay a while. While aspects of this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is never meant to take the place of therapy. Welcome back to Psyche Magic. I am deep in a season of wintering, of attempting to embrace the darkness, of incubating some new ideas, and giving myself permission to rest and move slowly. For me, this comes as a welcome shift from the first several months of postpartum, in which I expectedly became sleep deprived, but also developed a trauma response around being awoken at night by a baby with needs I sometimes wasn't sure how to meet. My nervous system responded to that repeated stimulus with a strong sense of dysregulation and fight or flight. I'm happy to report that a combination of medication, a responsive and caring partner, and exploring some adjustments in Iris's sleep routine have us in a much better place. I'm beginning to feel my system relax and remember what it feels like to be able to expect rest and trust that sleep will come with regularity once again. It's amazing to remember just how foundational rest is to our overall picture of health. It truly affects every aspect of my life and my ability to show up in each role that I play. So now more than ever, I am grateful for the return of rest and for a season that honors its potency. I am also thrilled to announce that I am re-emerging from my liminal cocoon of maternity leave and getting back into my work as a therapist. I'm returning to working out of an office space and seeing therapy clients both virtually and in person. It feels so good to be re-engaging with this work that is so incredibly meaningful to me. And for the first time in a long time, I'm in a position to accept new clients into my practice. At this stage, I specialize in working with LGBTQ+ and or neurodiverse adults who are healing from complex trauma and have an interest in depth-oriented and somatic modalities such as EMDR, experiential dream work, and IFS. That being said, I enjoy working with people from all walks of life. If you're interested in working with me therapeutically or know anyone in your life who you think would be a good fit, please feel free to reach out. You can find more information on my therapy website, jordanhale.net. My guest today, Becca Neighbor, astrologer and singer-songwriter, had fun choosing today's episode release date based on the auspicious astrological transits that are currently happening for each of us. The moon is now in Scorpio, which for Becca is activating her 7th house of intimate relationships, where she also has Pluto, which helps explain her abilities to deep dive in conversation on topics like astrology. And for me, as a Scorpio rising, Scorpio rules my 1st house, which pertains to how I present myself to the world, as well as my motivation for living, not to mention my natal moon residing in this very psychic sign as well. Wednesday has correspondences to the planet Mercury, the planet of communication, marketing, and broadcasting. In case you haven't noticed or are new to the show, we almost always air new episodes on Wednesdays. I'm always looking for new ways to add a little magic to my endeavors by harmonizing with the energy of the moment wherever possible. I view that intention in and of itself as a powerful spell. If you think all of this is as fascinating as I do, you're going to love my conversation with Becca, where we explored her themes of the divine feminine calling to her in dreams and the blending of her special interest in astrology with her honoring and claiming her power within her neurodivergence and her artistry. She enlightens us about these topics so generously and playfully, and I absolutely adored talking with her. As an intro to our conversation, you'll hear a snippet from her newest song released just earlier this month, Losing Grip. Enjoy. All right, Becca Neighbor, welcome to Psyche Magic.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hello, Angel. The pleasure is all mine. You and I have been just kind of casually talking about this for a long time, and I'm so glad we're finally doing it. For listeners, Becca gave me an awesome mother-daughter astrology reading when Iris was born, and it was so great. I'm honestly still just like basking in the glow of how fun that was. So thank you, Becca, for being here, and I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.
Yeah.
For listeners, Becca, please just give them a quick little synopsis just of who you are and what you do. Just give them a little intro, if you would.
My name is Becca Neighbor. I am an astrologer and a singer-songwriter. I've been in Nashville for a decade now, and I'm originally from Cincinnati, but moved here, a decade ago to pursue these creative outlets. So it's been a great journey, and now I'm here. So that's what I'm doing.
Yay! Exactly. So many folks that I have on the show are artists in some way, shape, or form. And so I love that, yes, we're going to be talking about astrology today, but just knowing that Becca is a creative person in the world and that she lives by those tenets and concepts. Here at Psyche Magic, that's what we're all about. We love people who have put the arts in the center of their lives in some way, shape, or form. So love it, Becca. Love you. Love that you're on the show, and just really excited to get into some fun things today.
Yeah.
All right, my love, we're going to pull tarot. Now, Becca and I have pulled tarot before during various sort of, little girls' night funsy times, but we're going to pull a card today together, and we're going to just see what comes up. Is tarot part of your practice lately, Becca? Is that something that you kind of reach for these days? Just curious.
It's not in my astrology practice, like when I'm giving a reading.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about it. I've always had like oracle cards or, a deck. And I kind of like having it like an area that I'm curious about that I don't know as much. Like,
exactly.
I enjoy when other people, and maybe that's how people feel when I tell them about astrology. Like, it's just kind of fun and like a surprise. So
yes,
I'm like always curious about it. I don't know at this point if I will like add it into my practice, but I'm fascinated by it. So, and I know that there are a lot of connections to astrology.
There are. Well, especially in, the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, which is the deck that I use on the show. Mm-hmm. There are so many references to astrology in that deck. I think Pamela Coleman-Smith was really into it. So yeah, you're right. But I also like what you're saying about how you can be interested in something and not have to just do a complete deep dive like you did with astrology, right? Like there's only so much room for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really fun. And I mean, while I am by no means a tarot expert, for me, tarot was something that I wanted to really just like dive into like super deeply. Whereas I feel the way that you feel about astrology, where I'm interested, but there's no way I'm going to be able to contain all of that information and have space for it in my already full hard drive of my brain. Yeah. So I love just having someone who's got all that knowledge and I can just pick their brain whenever I need to and not have to do it all myself. So
yeah.
Cheers to that.
Yeah.
So we'll trade. We'll skill share today.
Okay.
Okay, so we pulled our card. We got the Five of Pentacles. So I'm going to hold this up for
Ooh,
Becca so that Becca can really just
okay.
like take in the card. And I'm going to describe it to listeners who might not be familiar with the imagery. So again, this is Pamela Colman Smith's depiction of the Five of Pentacles. And we've got these two pretty down and out looking figures that are walking through the snow in front of what appears to be some kind of church facility, some kind of chapel or cathedral of some kind. There's a stained glass window depicting five pentacles. The snow is actively falling. One of the figures is wearing crutches, and they both seem to be struggling, having a hard time. One of the figures is also wearing a bell. We'll talk about that in a minute as well as a symbol. But yeah, it's a pretty intense card, right? Like pretty intense
Mhm.
imagery. Okay, so Becca, what happens for you when you see this card? Like what comes up just in the here and now, kind of that like quick take?
I guess that card kind of makes me think about maybe people who are forgotten, or
Hmm.
I was watching Shrinking last night,
I love that show. Yeah.
and like one of the characters, who seems to kind of have nothing and just at a really like low point. It really like pulled on my heartstrings because I don't know, just like I guess this time of year, there's just a lot of like loneliness. And I mean,
Yeah.
after, I don't know if I'm going too deep but
No,
like,
no such thing on this show, Becca. We're here for it. Go for
yeah,
it.
I have my son in the 12th house,
Yeah.
and this feels like a very 12th house card to me, which for people that don't know what that means, the
Hmm.
12th house is just like a more like private kind of hidden house where we go to like be alone or meditate, and I've struggled with that placement for myself. And but what I have learned about it is that I feel like I do have like a really strong connection to people that
Hmm.
maybe like other people kind of forget about, or it just, so I guess that's kind of what's coming up for me is
Yeah.
loneliness, or just like people that need someone to like reach out to them or just kind of connect with someone.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. When I look at this figure, in fact, I will say, frankly, I always had a hard time with this card. I am a person who gets really like overwhelmed by the loneliness and sorrow and suffering of the world. And so I feel things very deeply. And when I see figures like this, I get very like viscerally upset. And I've always been like that since I was a small child. Like my parents have all kinds of stories about me, like watching like a, children's cartoon and just getting distraught that one of the characters was, forgotten, left behind, lonely,
Yeah.
struggling. And so, yes, when I look at this card, I feel that palpable sense of sadness. And I think that, at least for me, that is a huge aspect of like what I would consider to be sort of my shadow, is that those feelings are so strong that it makes me want to turn away
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
those experiences and even those people, and
Hmm.
just not look because it hurts too much and it feels like there's not
Yeah.
enough that I can do, right? And so the figures in this card are sort of cast in this glow coming from this presumably some kind of church, some kind of helpful, quote unquote, type facility, right?
Hmm.
And so the big question of this card is, why are these characters cast out in the snow when there's this kind of beacon of hope or helpfulness that seems to be right next to them, but seems to be just out of grasp? And so there is a question here also of folks who are ostracized, marginalized for one reason or another, not welcome for one reason or another. One of the characters is wearing a bell. And I remember when I first noticed that, I was really curious about it. So I looked into it a little bit more. And I learned that back in the days of, really terrible illnesses like leprosy and leper colonies and things like this, folks would have to wear a bell around their neck to let people know that they were in the nearby vicinity of someone who might not have leprosy, who might not be ill. But it was another way of just really sort of othering them,
Yeah.
fear mongering. And so, yeah, this card, I think, kind of holds that tension between institutions that are meant to be helpful and hopeful versus the reality of like who is welcome in those spaces and why. And I agree that around this time of year, that is an especially sort of palpable question that I think a lot of us are holding in terms of the way that we might view these symbols a little bit more personally. I'm curious, like, if there's anything that shows up for you about whether you identify with any of this imagery in this card. And if so, how? What comes up there? If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I also feel just very affected by people that are othered and like in lots of different ways. I feel it's a little bit of a kind of split from what I was just talking about, but like I feel really passionate about just neurodivergent
Oh, yeah.
brains
Oh, yeah.
because I have ADHD. I didn't know it for a long time. And I think that one just I get really angry about it because I have so many people in my life that like just don't like they didn't know, they don't have the resources, and it affects so many things, and you can feel so much shame and feel different and like left out. And I don't know, I'm pretty like passionate about trying to like connect people to resources for that.
Yes.
Because I know that that's not as heavy as some of like, you know, like the loneliness epidemic and all of that, but there's just so much that people don't know about it, and
I know
it can really affect you. And so I think there's like something to do with like neurodivergence and othering that like really just like gets me going. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Because what you're speaking to is related. It's the loneliness of not feeling seen, not feeling adequately resourced and adequately cared for. And these are all on the branches of the same tree, right? And as another late diagnosed ADHDer, I hear you.
Yeah.
I have gone through my own very intense grief process around, gosh, what would it have been like to have had more of this information and more of this understanding earlier in my life? Like, how might that have allowed things to play out differently? And for me, that was a pretty intense grief process, actually. And so when I look at this card, I do see that there is a sense of grief. And there's also a sense of, again, like speaking strictly for myself, of reminders to not turn away, like reminders to engage, reminders to help where we can and how we can, whenever we can. And that's something that I don't know about you, but like that's something I cannot hear enough. Like I cannot be reminded of that enough. I need it like in every way I can all the time. So gratitude to this card for that reminder today. I feel like I needed that today. So we'll see how these figures speak to us as our conversation unfolds. They often carry additional messages as the conversation goes on. So we'll see.
Okay.
I'll kind of place them where I can see them. Thank you, Becca. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now I want to hear about your dream. Becca brought this crazy dream that was so, like, the imagery was so intense. And it was one of those, like, very kind of visceral, like, powerful dream experiences. And so I would love to unpack it with you. And I would love it if you could just give listeners a quick synopsis of this dream.
For sure. I think it was in October. I had this dream that I was sitting in a room, like on the floor. It was a really open room with lots of natural light. And there was like this giant snake in the room. And I was obviously terrified of it. But I was sitting and I couldn't really move. And my partner was like trying to like get rid of it, moved it into a like AC vent. I don't know why on earth that would have done anything, but you know, it was a dream. So it almost like kind of made the snake more kind of irritated. And then it started to kind of like just slither over my like crossed legs. And I was so just like irritated and shocked and uncomfortable and tense. So I just kind of like gently tried to kind of nudge it off me, like not making any sudden movements. And it sunk its teeth into my right hand and between my thumb and my pointer finger. And I was just like, I wasn't in pain. I was just so like shocked and mad that I tried to like move it out of the way. And then it sunk its teeth into my right thigh. And then at that point, I was just like so mad that I was just trying anything I could to like get it off me and like
Hmm.
almost like fold it. And I was like trying to hurt it, just like get it off
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, yeah, it was kind of blurry after that, but I was just like really foggy and like wanted to go to the hospital, but I like couldn't get to the car, and I was just in just so much shock. Like
Yes, yes.
yeah. So I guess just like the bite was so shocking to me,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
was really like, it was almost like no one else was that like worried. They were kind of just like chilling, and I was like, what the heck, like, you know.
Okay, cool. Because you said the other figure in your dream was your partner,
Yeah.
right? And so he at first was trying some strategies to try to get rid of the snake and it wasn't working. And then at this point, when you are so incredibly upset, you're saying that his reaction was much more just calm, like he
Yeah,
wasn't
like,
worried.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like just everything's okay. And I'm like, I have a hole in my hand. Like what?
Everything is not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, and then I just shock was like the overwhelming emotion and just.
Exactly. Exactly. You said anger
Mhm.
and then anger, also just like discomfort, that
Yes.
kind of like frozen feeling at first, right? But
Yeah.
then that turned into like anger, fighting, I'm going to do whatever it takes. Yeah.
Mhm.
But then the other part of the dream is this other theme I hear all the time, which is like the kind of, I call it like a thwarted theme, where it's like I'm trying to do something and I keep getting thwarted, like it's not
Yeah.
working. I can't get to the car. I can't get to where I'm trying to go. And so there's themes of that as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is the snake a figure that has shown up for you before? Is it like a recurring figure for you? Do you have any recollection of that?
I don't love snakes, but I feel like spiders are more in my dreams than snakes. And it was just really big. And also, somehow I knew after I'd been bit, like just, I guess, intuitively, that it wasn't venomous. It was just,
That feels important. That's interesting.
it was like, just, oh my God, I can't believe, why'd you bite
Like,
me? Like,
how dare you?
yeah, yeah. So, yeah,
Rude.
I don't, yes, very. I don't usually have dreams about snakes. No. So it was
Okay, cool.
kind of,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of a one-off. And it feels very significant to me that your dream self had this keen awareness that this bite is not poisonous,
Yeah.
right? That feels
Mhm.
very useful as we kind of get curious about like symbol and metaphor here, right? So
Mhm.
whatever is happening is not going to kill me, although it is absolutely and very validly distressing.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
Anyone pretending otherwise is not empathizing with me in this moment. Like, this sucks to get bitten by
Mhm.
a giant ass snake.
Yeah.
However, it's not going to kill me. Okay. Now you said the snake was huge. Any other interesting like factors in terms of like how the snake looked or presented itself that you remember?
It's like kind of like yellow and green, almost cartoon like. Like,
I was just thinking about the Jungle Book. I don't know if that's a real
yes,
thing,
yes.
but it's like that snake. Yeah.
I wrote in my journal that it looked like
Yeah.
the snake from like Jungle Book and Robin Hood. I think they're very
Yeah,
similar.
totally.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it would look like that.
That's so funny because I haven't seen that movie in like a really long time.
I know. Yeah.
But I remember that image, right?
Mhm.
I don't remember the role that the snake played in that movie. But it's also interesting that the snake didn't present itself as like this super terrifying, black, scary image. It was actually kind of cartoony, which is
Yeah.
interesting too, that the colors were kind of bright. And that even though it was scary and hurtful to me, there may have been another aspect to it. One thing that you might find interesting that I've come to understand about snakes in dreams, at least again from my own perspective, because snakes are a recurring figure for me in dreams. And I've come to read snakes as a really powerful symbol of the divine feminine. So yeah, obviously we can trace this all the way back to kind of the like snake in the Garden of Eden imagery, tempting Eve to take the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And so the way that figure has been kind of like misunderstood or misrepresented under patriarchy and patriarchal religion versus another reading of that figure could be that they opened a really powerful door, right? for the female spirit and for the female archetype. And so snakes are a figure that has historically been feared, but actually may have more going on under the surface. So when I think about the snake as divine feminine energy, I think about whether that energy is maybe calling to you in some way at this point in your life. And I'm curious about what was going on for you, like in October specifically. Do you remember like what was happening in your world? Yeah. So share a little bit about that.
So it was the first time I was releasing new music in like a very long time. And in my chart, I have Mars in Cancer, which is a placement that's not the most comfy. It's in its fall, which means that it just isn't well resourced. And I struggle to put myself out there and to just capture momentum.
Sure.
And during this time, in like Mars was in Cancer. So I was getting this boost.
Oh, yeah.
Like an activation where I was like, really productive and okay, I'm releasing a song, I've got content I'm creating, I'm doing astrology readings, like I'm working, I just took on a second job, like I had all of this stuff going on and it was really good stuff, but I was like so excited that there was momentum. I just kept taking it on because I'm like, it's gonna die, I'm gonna lose the momentum.
I see. Let's just max this out while we can. Yeah.
And I feel like I am like the epitome of that sticker that's like, hang on, let me overthink this. So I was like, I have to take advantage of this like activation in my chart that's just gonna like propel me forward. And I think I may have like just kind of run myself into the ground like pretty quickly because I was just so excited to like have this like kind of like momentum moving forward. So
I see.
Yeah.
But there was also a danger of potentially burning out, taking on too much, right? Which, I mean, this is probably true for most of us, but it sounds like that could be a theme for you as well. Yeah.
And like connecting it back to ADHD, I just sometimes can't understand like time. Like I'm like, yeah, I can take all this on. And then I get to it and I'm like, what did I sign myself up for? Like,
in what world would that ever be possible?
Yeah, I can't commit to 5 things in one day. Like, that's insane. But yeah, so it was kind of like an exciting time, but also like, whoa, I need to pump the brakes just a little bit and like have a little bit more balance,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, and the divine feminine is associated with, intuition and discernment, right? More so than masculine energy, which can be more about just like powering through and powering forward. Like the divine feminine teaches us to wait, pause, reflect, listen. And so those themes totally make sense to me, that the dream could have been just giving you a little bit of a warning sign, a little bit of a wake-up call. Yeah. Absolutely. The hard thing is that it's so unvarnished in dreams. Like it's so visceral and intense. And sometimes it makes it hard to receive the message because you're too busy being like, oh my God, that was terrible. I never want to experience that again. That was awful.
Yeah.
But if we can be curious like you're doing, then we can usually take something away from it.
I knew that it wasn't like trying to hurt me. It just felt like just so shocking. Like, well, why me? Why are you like coming after me? But I guess just trying to get my attention, which makes sense as to why I was, my partner was kind of like very chill and in waking life. He's always like, everything's fine. And I'm like, my brain is exploding. Like,
So that's another theme too, is that, exactly. There's a balancing act there for both of you, right? In that there's a balancing act of understanding each other's perspective.
Yeah,
for sure. What did you say? My brain is on fire. Is that what you said?
My brain is going to explode. Like
my brain's going to explode. Yes. Yes, I can relate.
So many competing thoughts all the time. I would love to know what it's like, what other people experience. Do they have one thought at a time?
What's it like to not be like that? I know. Yeah, completely. Yeah, I agree. So many thoughts all the time, just piled on top of each other. Constantly. And it's funny because it's like that can be a superpower under certain circumstances, right?
Oh, yeah.
But not all circumstances. On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
I really have come to like appreciate my ADHD, and I really I spent this past year working with a coach, and it's helped me
Oh, good.
just like shed some of the shame and just like lean into the things that I am really good at and kind of
Yes.
celebrate it, because it feels the bell or the other. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's bad. It's a disorder. It's whatever. But I'm like, there are really great things about it. And we did keep everybody alive in hunter-gatherer times because we kept pushing to like, neurotypicals were like, let's stay here. We're safe. And neurodivergent brains were like, well, let's just see what else is there. Like the high risk, high reward.
Really?
Yeah. So it's like we kept everybody
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So
wait, so what you're describing is that because of the nature of, these types of neurodivergent brains like ADHD, there was always this kind of seeking behavior. Like, okay, what else? What else? How can we expand the way that we are thinking or living or in order to kind of keep evolving, keep moving. Ooh, that's fascinating. I love knowing that.
Yeah.
Wow. Never heard that before. Okay. Love it. Love it. Love it. The dream is that's a perfect example of like the way that a dream can present this like very intense, powerful symbol that ends up tying exactly back to something that you're going through in that moment and even like as a theme in your life. So I love that you shared that. It's wonderful. Okay, now let's transition a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about your work and what's going on lately. So Becca, you are actively giving astrology readings, right? Like this is a service that is open and available. So tell us, okay, obviously I already know this because I got a reading from you and it was fabulous, but tell our listeners like what happens when they sit down with you for a reading? Like what can they expect? How's it going to go? Like just walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, I do a little bit of a variety. I've been doing readings like as pop-ups. So, those are going to be like 15 minutes or maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And
just a little taste.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting about that type of reading. I'm just meeting this person for the first time. Hopefully they come with their birth time, because that's really how you're going to get the most out of an astrology reading.
Now, real quick, Becca, you need your birth time because that determines the rising sign. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And the rising sign is always going to be the first house. There are 12 houses in your chart. The rising sign dictates where everything else falls. And when you think about like the first house being your physical body and yourself, the fourth house being family, seventh house being one-on-one relationships, and 10th house being career, it can make a huge difference. If that rising sign is shifted, everything else changes. So it's really important to know that time. So hopefully somebody can come with that information and like a pop-up, like a quick reading. I'm like cold reading this chart, like I've never seen this person before. And sometimes that almost like kind of activates, I don't know, I can just kind of like go in like a hyperfixation mode and like really just like give this like really powerful reading, because I'm just taking in all this information at once. And I like to kind of hit like the big three, your sun, your moon, and your rising, and just kind of give somebody a deeper understanding of how those three placements work together.
Yeah.
And then in like a one-on-one reading, we can look at annual perfections. We can look at transits or aspects in your chart where like different planets have an aspect is where like two different planets are having a relationship with each other. So
yes,
it could
that is based on the like, mathematical angle at which those 2 points sit on your chart, right?
Yeah. So some can create tension. Some are really easy and like natural. So we can look at the aspects and, just the placements of the planets and what signs they're in, and if those planets are comfortable in that sign, if they're not comfortable. That to me is, I think, one of the most fascinating parts. Being someone that has a lot of placements that are not comfortable.
Ah, yes.
So it's like you kind of have to work harder in that area,
Mhm.
which can be more rewarding. It's just
Absolutely. It's just a challenge.
it's challenging. So, and a lot of the parts in our chart that are like super easy and natural, like we almost take those areas for granted. So it's just like,
Doesn't that
wow.
make perfect sense? Yeah. You
Yeah.
don't even think about it because it just like
Yeah.
flows. Yeah.
It's like a natural gift. So yeah, like looking at how comfortable is this planet and what house is it in? How is it coming through in your life? And how is it reacting to the other parts of your chart? There's
Yeah.
so many areas. So I try to keep it like simple and break it down because I know that it's a lot of information and I don't want to overwhelm someone. But yeah, I just like see what speaks to me first when I first look at the chart. I'm like preparing it.
Yeah.
And then once we're in the reading, like if someone has questions, we can kind of just take it wherever you want to go.
Of course.
But yeah, there's so many different pieces. I could talk about it for days.
I know.
But
well, and
yeah.
I would think that if you were to do a reading where you parsed out every single aspect and every single transit, we're talking hours upon hours of information here, endless possibilities. But what I love about you and the way that I've experienced you do readings is that you bring this really intuitive, like pared down approach to the way that you present the information. You're able to really hone in on the things that stand out to you about a certain chart because you've seen so many charts at this point, right? I remember you even saying like you have this like photographic memory where you can see someone's chart and you can just like immediately picture it in your mind, like forever. It's just there, which I think is so cool. But yeah, I love that you have this way of just kind of like zooming into the things that are really poignant and like specifically special about like this chart. And I think that's just so fun because I'm sure you could get a reading from a bunch of different people and get a bunch of different takes. But I love that you kind of bring some of yourself and your own intuition to the way that you read. The way that I've experienced that is that makes me feel very held and very seen because the thing is your birth chart is like it's vulnerable. Like you're showing someone like your soul. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty intense. And so you want to feel like someone is holding that information with a lot of care and grace. I want to ask you about this because one thing that I've run into in the world of astrology is a lot of like, sadly, a lot of like fear mongering and a lot of like black and white stuff where we have like good and bad placements. And I want to get your take on that. Like, is there such a thing as like a bad placement or a bad chart? Tell us what you think about that.
I was just listening to a lecture from my teacher when I was taking one of her classes. Her name's Catherine Urban, and she's really great. Okay. If you want some really great content, follow her on Instagram. But she talked about how there's like basically like code of ethics with astrology where we really, as astrologers, should do no harm to anyone. Of course, you can like look at a chart and be like, okay, that could be challenging. But I think the way that you like deliver it and like explain it, the natal chart is really just like a bunch of conditions of the story of your life. So there's so many possibilities, and astrologers are just like interpreting these conditions that you have, and like it's up to you what you do with it. But I think that it's really, there's nothing black and white about astrology. And I think that trying to scare people is not the way to go. I had a reading that really did not sit with me when I was younger.
I remember you mentioning this. Yes. Thank you for sharing this.
It was kind of like, ooh, you're going to struggle with relationships. Like this is challenging. And like, I felt so defeated and,
harmful.
I ended up getting a tattoo of my chart because I've got this giant cardinal square. It's like pretty challenging energy to work with. But after I left that reading, the next day I was like, I cried and I like felt a type of way. But then I was like, no, I'm actually going to like dive as far into this as I possibly can. That ADHD hyperfixation, I'm going to learn everything there is to know about it.
Yep.
And in doing that, I learned a lot about myself, and I feel like I can use my kind of like challenging placements to help other people. Like
Yes.
what you were describing about how I have this intuitive like language of explaining
Yeah.
it, I would
Yeah.
attribute that to my Mercury in Pisces. Mercury doesn't like to be in
Yeah.
Pisces. It's not comfy. Mercury wants facts and figures, and Pisces is spiritual and very like fluid. And working
Mhm.
in an office, the Mercury in Pisces doesn't work great for me. But when I'm like explaining astrology or writing a song, it comes out very naturally. So I
Yeah.
think just like helping people to understand what conditions they have, like, I mean, that's just kind of life, just working with what you have. And I don't see it as black and white. And I don't like making people afraid or like, oh, if you have this placement, like you're screwed. No, it's just, and I also believe that we like choose our charts.
Mm.
So I think that we kind of chose the conditions that we put up
Okay.
with. So yeah, does that
I
answer?
love that,
Okay.
Becca. Yes. And I love that you shared that your part of your kind of origin story with astrology came out of this really kind of harmful reading that you received, and that you were able to channel that into this experience of taking your power back and then transmuting that into education and resourcing for others. Like, I'm looking at the Five of Pentacles again now
Mhm.
of this is a creation of an energy and a world where we can lift each other up, right?
Mhm.
And recognize that everyone has gifts and challenges. And that's just part of the nature of being human. One of my favorite poems is called Desiderata by Max Ehrman. And they say that they're like the most important part of moving through life and honoring our fellow man is recognizing that, like, there will always be people who are greater and lesser than ourselves in any given moment. That's just the nature of being a fluid human being. So I love that you sort of, yeah, took your power back there because that's what it's about, right? If I were to give a reading that was about fear mongering and this is a bad placement, that's just a power play. Like, it's just like exerting like a power
Mhm.
dynamic. And so, yeah, I see the way that you do readings as being much more in that sort of divine feminine spirit of like intuitive, collaborative. We love that here.
Yeah.
And that brings up another question actually that I have, which is I'm curious as to whether like the way that you have explored and really sort of digested the concepts of astrology, if that also kind of feeds and contributes to your work as an artist. Like, do you find that that kind of wisdom tradition, that knowledge path has like seeped into your artistry? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they are basically fused together.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to my website, they're both on there. And I struggled with that because I was like, wait, these are two separate things. Like they need to be, but they are both very much, you can't have one without out the other. If you come to one of
Yeah.
my shows, I'm going to be giving a forecast to the audience of like, well, the moon is in this sign, and this is what's going on, and how's everybody feeling, so like I've always done that. It took me until like the last year to really be like, okay, this makes me like unique and I can't stop talking about it.
Yeah.
So I just have to like lean into it. And
Yeah.
I had this design for a t-shirt made that it says Becca Neighbor knows my moon sign. And it goes with my astrology and my music.
I love that.
And I probably do because I remember everybody's moon sign. But yeah,
I
so
love that.
it's really fun to just like lean into it. And the most recent song I released, I picked, a full moon to release it on. And, you know, it was on like an Aries full moon, which I have this cardinal square, the
Yeah.
cardinal signs being Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn. And so even though that's like the most challenging part of my chart,
Mm.
it's like what I know the most. So
Hmm.
these four songs that I just, finished, I'm gonna like release them on those points just for fun and just because like it kind of feels good to me. Yeah, and like just kind of seeing like the color and the flavor of like how I the first one was Aries. So it was very like, I just kind of dove in, didn't really think about it. It was very Aryan in nature. Like I just kind of went with it and just thought about it
Sure.
later. And so I'm just going to be curious to see how like each one has a different delivery. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the way that you're describing it, it helps me, and I hope that it helps listeners understand that, like, much like the way that we read tarot here on the show and that I do in my practice, there's a way in which we can view these wisdom traditions as just sort of a prism through which to filter our experiences and to see ourselves more clearly versus this prescriptive sort of fortune telling,
Hmm.
casting your fate, which of course I understand is an important part of the evolution of some of these
Yeah.
practices, the ways that they've been used historically. But I think that we've evolved past that, or I think that we can. And I think that we can see them in this much more expansive light where they can just help us come to know ourselves better and understand each other better, maybe. That's my hope for the sort of resurgence that we've seen culturally in these practices and these traditions, is that maybe they'll be a way to bring us closer together and create more understanding for ourselves and each other. One question my ADHD brain wants to give to you now before I forget it, because you were mentioning how you give like a little forecast, right? Like when
Hmm.
you play a show.
Yeah.
And I think that's so fun because, we've been talking about readings as they pertain to like a birth chart or like a natal chart, but it can also be interesting to use astrology in terms of like what's happening right
Hmm.
now, right? And so
Yeah.
we would call that exploring transits, I guess. Like, would that be the right language
Yeah.
for that? Just sort of like looking at the astrology weather forecast of the
Yeah.
moment in terms of where the planets are. How much does that play into your kind of astrological practices? Like, how much are you working with like the astrology of the moment versus like your personal chart, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So after I released my song in October, I picked 1111 for my show because
Yeah.
the moon was going to be in Pisces. So I knew that
Okay.
my Mercury, which is how I communicate, would be like at ease.
Okay.
And it would be in like a harmonious trine, like to my rising sign, which is also your voice and like how you come across. And so I did pick it, with that in mind.
Yeah.
Another fun thing that I think your listeners might enjoy, and I got this from my teacher, Catherine Urban, but so when there's a new moon, which is right now,
Wait, I just remembered that. Yeah.
so new moons are pretty quiet and like the energy is kind of lower,
Yeah.
and full moons are more, energetic and vibrant. And so if you were to have a party around a new moon,
Yeah.
maybe half the people show up
Oh,
because
wow.
it's like just kind of quiet and people want to be kind of like alone and cozy. But if you have something near full moon, you might get like twice as many people as you're expecting. And
Interesting.
it's because in ancient times, they had to rely on the light of the moon, to like have celebration.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
literally.
So when there'd be like a new moon, it was like very kind of quiet and like
Sure.
everyone's kind of just, being alone or just kind of doing their thing. So like I try to think about that. Like if I'm planning a show or a release or something, like, it can't always line up, but like, okay, well, it's close enough to a full moon that maybe more people will
Wow.
come. So
Okay,
yeah.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that this is a part of how you approach, big important moments, right? Things that you want to put out into the world, things that you want to birth into the world. Like, how can I do that at an auspicious time, right? That's just so fun. And it's just a way of, my understanding is that this is a way of just sort of like harmonizing our energies with
Hmm.
that of the planets and what the energy of the moment, right? And that makes so much sense. And that to me, I mean, as someone who's very witchy, that to me is a form of spell work, right?
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
I'm trying to work with these energies to bring about some kind of outcome or some kind of energy transference that I'm
Hmm.
looking for, hoping for. And I think that's, again, very empowering, not to mention just fun.
Hmm. Yeah, I do have
It's
fun.
just fun.
Yeah.
So yes, now it sounds like your readings that you offer are more focused on sort of like the natal chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
More so than like the astrology of the moment, which makes sense because that's always changing.
Yeah, and I would like to eventually maybe focus more on transits. I know people have a lot of questions about like when is this going to happen, or
I
you know
know.
what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
I'm just so fascinated with the birth chart because it's the story of your life. So
The foundation. Yeah.
there's so much that you can dive into with just that. So I think, you know, as I continue with my practice, like I'll expand more into transits but I'm just so fascinated by, you know, what makes a person tick and all of that. So
me too.
Yeah. And I'm always learning. Like I want to just continue my education for astrology because it's never ending. And I think that's the ADHD that's like, let's hyperfixate and just
I know. Well,
everything.
how fun to have a subject where you're like, cool, I'm not going to run out of resources and material here. Like we are set for life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, an ADHDer's like dream come true.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I love it, Becca. Okay, we're coming close to time, which is crazy because that time flew by. But I want to make sure that listeners know, like, how do they find you, engage with your work, follow you? So just give us the resources, give us all the places where we can follow along, please.
Yeah. First stop, I have a website. It's just BeccaNeighbor.com. You can book a reading on that platform. You can find me on Instagram at Becca Neighbor. You can DM me any questions or, you know, just reach out if you want to book something with me. Every month I have been doing full moon readings at the Waymore Hotel.
Cool.
Yeah. In Nashville. They have like a rooftop bar that's new and really like, it's really great when the weather's nice, like there's fire pits and everything. So, and yeah, I'll be releasing some new music also around the full moon.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that'll be coming out soon.
Awesome. Okay. So that's all available on your website. Mm-hmm. And oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to have to go get a full moon reading at the Waymore Hotel because that sounds super fun. And I'm seriously going to keep that in mind, what you said about like events on the full moon are where it's at, like plan accordingly.
But, you know, a new moon vibe can also like, you know, if you're
depending on what you're going for. Yes.
Yeah. Because that could be more like intimate conversations instead of being spread thin over, you know, lots of different people. So I think, yeah, it can kind of work in your favor sometimes. But it is fun to like look back at an event and be like, oh, yes, that's interesting.
Oh, it's so fun. Oh, I love it. Becca, you have so many fun things going on. I'm just so excited and happy for you. And I'm so glad that you wanted to come and just share a little bit about what you're doing with listeners. I hope they can engage with you, connect with you, because yeah, we love Becca. Becca's a friend of the pod forever. And that's Becca Neighbor, by the way, listeners, like neighbor, like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, like how you would think that you spell neighbor, just FYI. Becca, you're awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you and just your generosity of giving your time. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here and I love what you're doing. So I'm just happy to be involved. So thank you.
Yay. Oh, I'm glad to hear that, Becca. Well, we love you. Thank you and take care.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for this episode. Thank you again to my guest, Becca Neighbor. May you continue to follow the yellow brick road of your interests and intuition, guiding others to do the same. We'll see you back here next month with another amazing guest. If you want more Psyche Magic, be sure to check out the Psyche Magic Salon on Substack. There you'll find all full and bonus episode archives for the podcast, as well as my weekly written newsletter with magical musings and recommendations for sources of creative inspiration. You'll also find the recorded version of our salon ritual to invoke creative flow. That's psychemagic.substack.com. If you haven't already, please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app of choice. It really makes a difference and helps other people find the show. We hope you'll also follow along with our shenanigans on Instagram and TikTok at Psyche Magic Podcast. Psyche Magic was produced and recorded by me, Jordan Hale. Editing for this episode is by Misuzu Inaga. Our theme music is by Young Summer. Artwork is by Annika Murphy. Special thanks go to Daniel Higbee, Grace Fuse, and Michael McMillan. Thank you so much for listening. I'll leave you with a question. If you must sleep through a third of your life, are you willing to sleep through your dreams too? Get your dream journals out, y'all. Until next time.